Anyway, so for those who don't have some, and a very quick potted history. I studied in the UK. My first degree was in sculpture at Birmingham Polytechnic, now Ogden University. And so I was with a fabulous small bunch of people. I actually started off as an interior designer. What I really wanted to be was a theatre designer, but nobody would accept me to do theatre design. The only thing that was offered to me was interior design in Birmingham. I spent about 6 weeks on the course, maybe 3 weeks, I can't remember. Detested it. And begged the sculpture department to take me, which they did. So I ended up doing 4 years in Birmingham. And then applied to do a postgrad. I did very well. So I applied to do a 3-year master's at the Royal College in London in sculpture. And didn't get an interview. And then a friend of mine said, "Oh, there's still places open in the painting department at the Royal College. Give that a whack, you know." So I put an application for painting as a sculptor. And they interviewed me and gave me a place. So I spent 3 years at the Royal College in the painting department, not making paintings generally, working in ceramics and making pictures by collaging, basically. So from the age of mid-20s onwards, I was making work very quickly by collage. And of course I'm still doing that in a slightly different way, but that's the way that I work. So I've been over here since 1983, briefly 83, and then back full-time since 1984. And taught at the university for a long time, 32 years, something like that. Fabulous students, learned a lot from them. And now I'm working full-time in the studio. So the show that's on, this show, which is titled Digging in the Dirt for Diamonds, I always kind of like titles. You know, I was trying to work out what I was going to call this show. And I had 3 titles, and Rupert was there, my son, and one evening when I said, "What do you think of these titles? Which one do you like most?" He went, "I don't like any of them." And I thought, because titles are actually really difficult. So he came up with some alternatives, which were absolutely dreadful. And then he was talking to Enrica, and I was trying to work out what I would call the thing, and he was going blah, 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 blah. It's like digging in the dirt for diamonds. And I went, "Good, that's good." So, Digging in the Dirt for Diamonds is a really good title because I literally do dig around in the dirt looking for things that I can use. So all the stuff on the walls here and in there would generally have gone to the dump. I started using lino about 15 years ago. So I've been in Australia on a residency called the Newton Foundation. And I started making inlaid works out of thin plywood. So I was buying from the local hardware store very thin plywood. It was very hot in Derbyshire. We had a big property out in the bush, a lovely studio, and I was just painting large pieces of plywood with gouache paint. It was drying immediately, so these lovely surfaces. And I was cutting shapes out, simple shapes, out with a Stanley knife, laying them on top of a coloured base, drawing around, and then cutting out and laying plywood. And the reason I was doing that was I wanted to make kind of simple abstracted landscapes and use symbols that I'd found or shapes that I'd seen, and I was picking up things like boomerangs and various other things. So I made a series of works in layers, and then I came back to New NZ, and we were on holiday in Coromandel, the family, and we were driving past a paddock with an old barn that had come down, and I stopped the truck, went and had a look to see if there was anything there. There was some old lino, 2 different patterns, and I brought it back and put it on the studio floor at university, and that's where it sat for 12 months. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. And one day I thought, I wonder if I could cut that out and put it in there like I did with the plywood. So I made a series of works with 2 different linoleums. And that's when I started going out looking for more linoleum. and making more complex works. And I've been doing that ever since. So I have in the studio, I probably have, honestly, one of the largest collections of linoleum anywhere in the world, I'd say, except probably a major museum. Little bits of some, large bits of others. And I'm constantly looking and finding. So both all works in this exhibition, and they range from mid-2019 to 10 days ago, really. So it's a body of work over 2 years, roughly. There's many more works, but this is a selected collection of works over that period. So these works here, these grey works, there's a grey theme going, a sort of very neutral, earthy thing going on over there. This was linoleum that I got from a friend of mine, Tim Lonsdale, who's an architect, and he gave me a ring one day and said, I'm pulling down the barn, or shed, there's some lining in there, it's not very good, it's really dirty, don't know whether you want it, myself in the book. And it was, there was a lot of it, but it's an unusual linoleum, I'd say. This grey linoleum is probably 1950s, late 40s, 50s, something like that. And filthy and deteriorating as well. So in fact, in the making of these works, I've kept the dirt in a number of them and protected the dirt because it just feels earthy, literally, and it's beautiful, and it has that patina, and I'm always interested in the veneer and the patina of objects, and linoleums especially. So some linoleums are very fresh, very new, and some of them are very old, so so that in itself tends to direct a certain sort of way of designing an image. So these works here, so the thing with making lino works is that you never really run out of linoleum, because when I cut a shape like this out of here, I end up with that. It comes out, and then it's gone back, and then it's come out, and then it's gone back, and then it's come out. So, and then over there as well. So these works all have a relationship with each other, just in terms of the iconography. But they begin to mutate as it's happening. So these works came out of these by accident, really. And these have a different quality to those. So those are doves, or pigeons, or whatever. These are ravens or something else. But there you've got two again. This one is in here, and you wouldn't normally, you have to work hard at the picture to find things like that, which is what I really like people to do, to kind of constantly discover things and rediscover things and lose them and come back. But I give little hints. So there's the gold leaf tip on the edge of each beak there, and these two forms are feeding on this or kissing it or whatever. So there's constantly twins going on. Twins going on in here, here, and over there. So I'm just going to shoot over to these ones quickly. In terms of, this is a really, for me, this is a really interesting format. And after making Middlemarch in their big work, which is a narrative that you have to walk down, I wanted to do some walk down narratives here. And these are the same. So the difference between a square and these is there's a big difference, It's a completely different kind of picture making going on. If I'm working on a square, I can choreograph it off for a start. A square's neutral. In other words, it can go anywhere around, really. And when I'm working within a square, I really use certain devices to hold the picture in there, like plotting on the edges and that sort of thing, and holding this sort of pictorial dynamic going. With a long work like this, you can't do that because it's, there's a full stop here, and there's a full stop here, so it holds again, but it's a big distance between there and there, so you have to find other ways of making pictures work. And there are a few things that I do, which is sort of any artist can be recognised through sort of autobiographical sort of way, like a signature, really, you know? So there's, you'll generally, when you look at my work, you'll find these vertical structures running through a work, and to counteract that continual, you'll get anchored across here with horizontals or diagonals pulling you in and one thing another. So what I'm trying to do is to take you along with a rhythm and then to stop you and start you as you go. So if you see this work here, there's a pigeon there, there's a pigeon there, there's a pigeon there. There isn't a pigeon there because that's a negative, but it's there. You read it, so it's sort of elusive. And this isn't a pigeon. What is it? It is what it is. But it relates to these, so the connection between here and here, it's not a repetitive do, it's a bang, something, bang, dee. So it's a sort of way, it's like kind of, I like to think of it as sort of, if I was writing, but it's a way of punctuation and a way of sort of concrete writing, really, concrete poetry, you know, in a sense. And obviously colour is the other thing. Colour and surface, and then drawn line, and then gold leaf, if it's there, are the other elements in a work like this that I'm considering all the time. Kind of lazy work in a way, because it's very easy for me. I mean, when I say that, it's actually really difficult to make pictures, but I'm not, if you're painting, you're very much more, it's a much more precarious activity for me to make paintings. Because when you put a mark down, it's difficult to get rid of that mark, you either go with it or, you know, whatever. With line work, when I'm working on these, I'm constantly going in and shifting things and turning things and moving things around, taking them off, trying something else. So it's not lazy, but it's kind of easier in a way for me, and I've got used to, I've got such a massive pile of artifacts. It's like a midden, you know, from old works from the past, and I sift through and look and go, I wonder what, and I'll put it down, and it often doesn't work, but it sets up a scenario where other things move and change, and eventually, after a period of time, it begins to settle down and become something that I want. And then I begin to really choreograph it, and I spend a lot of time just literally shifting something there from there to there, and from there to there to there. Time is a few things that you just brought up, Marion, about time, and one is the age of something, literally, the time of the material you're using, but also the time that it takes to make the work. Middlemarch took 6 months. These took very little time in comparison. But these were quick drawings. Both these works took half a day, really, you know, they're very fast. But in saying that, I was on a run. I've been working, and it's like when you're writing, you start writing and it's hard to begin and it's hard to continue, and then all of a sudden you get to a point where paragraphs happen quite quickly, and then they happen really quickly, and they're very resolved, and you think, wow, wish I could do that all the time, which you can't, you know? So it's a matter of, it's the right moment, it's the right materials there, and you're not trying too hard to do whatever it is you're doing. It just happens. and you know as an artist when that's right, when it is happening. And that's the rare thing, actually, is being able to grasp the possibilities that are there very quickly and not lose them. You know, Middlemarch is a complicated work. You know, there's 1,000 pieces in Middlemarch. I knew when I started to make it, I didn't know what it was going to be like, but I knew that it was going to be yellow ochre like tussock, because that's the material that everything was laid onto. And the reason it's that material is that I thought, what can I use to cover something that's 5 metres long? So, immediately, I had to use one linoleum or another linoleum, but I didn't have that amount of all of these different linoleums. So that was a given. So I knew it was going to be yellow ochre, I knew it was going to be 6 panels, I knew it was going to be full of birds, moths, moons, trees, plants, whatever. It was going to be a magical garden. And then I started finding things to put on there and laying them down. That's a really, really complicated work. And it's 6 months of work, so I'd go every day and I would take things away or move them a fraction, and that was a day's work, really. When it got to the point that I was satisfied with it, I would go around and draw around every single little element. And as I was drawing around them, I'd shift them slightly sometimes as I was going along, finally, I'd shift them again and draw around. And then you have to spend time taking each of those units and cutting out all those forms as carefully as possible with a Stanley knife, and then laying them down and piecing the pieces in there. Of course, the final Middlemarch is called Middlemarch Remembered for two reasons, really. Middlemarch is a place in central Otago, which is, has a lot of tussock and fabulous sort of scenery found in central Otago. So it's a place name, but it's also, that was all inlaid but not stuck down when the shootings at the mosque took place, which you could hear in the studio. And like everybody, it was an enormously awful moment and very moving. And 50 people had died at that point, and I counted the birds, and there were 47 birds. 43 birds, sorry. So I put 7 birds out and inlaid some more birds, so that it's a garden with 50 birds. And that for me was a way of kind of addressing the way that I felt about what had just happened. So that's Middlemarch Remembered. So it's called Middlemarch, and then it's called Middlemarch Remembered after that event, and then it was stuck down. There's no gold leaf in there at all, but so in terms of that time thing, Marion, one, it took 6 months, and because it was 6 months, there's a wide range of linoleum in there, because I had time to change things, look for different linoleums, find linoleums and cut the shapes and one thing or another, so it was a much quicker process than this.
I'm afraid I went into another thought when I was looking at them the other day. That's the trouble when someone hangs around a bird,
Right.
which was around the idea of time if you get a bird brain. So as a human being, we've got the possibility of memory.
Yeah.
And then to hear something happen and think about it and do something else. But you've got so many birds. But when we think about birds, we think about, say, a blackbird or a thrush.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like any blackbird or thrush that could be now, or it could have been thousands of years ago. It's a blackbird or thrush. They're kind of consistent with one character in our minds. And I think it's a very strange thing that you've used Middlemarch Remembered as well as part of the title, but you've got these characters that they're almost supernatural in their lack of memory. Anyway, it's just a thought, but I wondered also, sorry I'm carrying on.
No, that's right.
About the idea of lino, which was on the floor,
Yeah.
and you were on it flat. and the sense of a place like Middlemarch, which is kind of a bit, you've got more of a ground sense than a flight sense, but you're using birds.
Yeah, well, birds for me, I mean, I started using birds. I mean, the thing is that after being in Australia and dealing with the Australian landscape, which is very easy, because the Australian landscape is really abstract. And it says, anybody ever been out to Central Australia and stuff? So it's when Sidney Nolan talks about it, he talks about the dislocation of objects within the landscape and the shadows. So often the sun is so powerful, the colour is so extreme, like the earth is bright red, the sky is bright blue, the greys are amazing. I mean, you get these, so there are elements in that landscape that are, yes, I can abstract these easily. I can make colour field works, hard edge works, I can have very little in there. And they're going to be landscapes, and they're going to feel like Australian landscapes. New Zealand landscapes, when I got back, I thought, oh God, how do you deal with New Zealand landscape? I mean, you end up making, I thought I'll end up making cake tins, Swiss cake tins, you know? The Alps, the pine trees, the this, that, and the other, you know? The strange clouds. And I'm not sure I can do that, and I'm not sure I even want to do that, so what am I going to do? And of course I spent a lot of time in the landscape, in the bush. The thing about New Zealand for me, when you're in the bush, is that there are lots of strange things in there when you start looking around. And there are birds. And so when you hear a bellbird, and you think, wow, it's amazing, and you look for it, and you think, where is it? It's in that tree. I know it's in that tree, but where is it? You're looking around. And eventually you find it, after a lot of looking, and you look away for a second, and then you look back and you can't find it again. So it's that kind of elusiveness of birds as a sort of, as life in a space. So the birds, I'm not actually, I was an ornithologist when I was a kid. There was a photograph of me holding on the observer book with birds when I was about this big in Morocco. So I'm interested in birds, I think they're fantastic. But I'm not making images of particular birds. I'm using birds as a shape to put into a landscape. And the landscapes rarely have horizons. So you're in a space and there are all these shapes. So it's a way of making abstract pictures. You know, what turns me on most about making pictures is dealing to the formal elements of picture making. In other words, how do you create a pictorial dynamic? How do you make people move along it and look at a picture? How do you direct? It's like being a conductor in an orchestra. And birds are just one of many things that I use as shapes. So when I talk about those as doves or pigeons, I only do that because, it's not that they're things about peace or whatever, it's just that they have that feel of a pigeon or a dove as opposed to others that have a feel of something else. And also, you know, it's very clear that I love artists like George Braque, you know, who used doves as well, but differently. Paul Klee, who used birds in a very different way. There are lots and lots of people that have used elements, landscape elements that I haven't mimicked, but I love so much, and it's part of my history, you know? So when people talk about originality, and people say, you know, you often have people talking about your work and say, yes, they remind me of this, and they remind me of that, and they remind me of whatever. That's not a bad thing, you know. You only learn from looking. If you're locked up in a cupboard from day one, and you have no contact with the outside world, what you're going to do is going to be completely different to what somebody who's actually lived a life will do, you know. So you can't not be affected by what's around you. Everybody is. I was going to say something else, and I can't think what it is now.
I was thinking, because I really understand the freedom that you get out of the shape of a bird and the lack of it having to be attached to a ground fine, because it's freed you from the need to have ground fine.
But it's the power of that shape. I mean, that shape for me is like, it's such a good shape.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have invented that shape, you know? But I was nutty enough to see it and go, yep, that's going in, you know? So I love the fact that I make work that is with shapes really that are given to me, you know? I just have to practice digging them dirt for diamonds, you know? And when I sort out my table after 6 months' work, and boy, it's a mess in there, piles of linoleum, and I have to store it again, and I will go around and literally I will save, you know, I will go around looking for little bits and putting them little elements, and I'll make a decision. Is that worth keeping? Is it not worth keeping? And it's a really fast decision, you know? So in my sort of working method, I know what's going to be useful later and what isn't, you know? Damien Wilkins has written a couple of times about my work. First time I didn't ask him, it's from New Zealand, and he said something really, really interesting. He said, Simon Ogden finds linoleum, patterned linoleum, and remakes patterned linoleum. And I hadn't thought about it like that before. And when he said that, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So Middlemarch and Highway 285 are patterned linoleums. In other words, this isn't patterned linoleum, this is a narrative, a pictorial narrative, it's like a painting. These things here, and each of those panels, are designed, you know, so the elements are separated away and given their breathing spaces, but it's like ding, 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 and they could be polka dots in the way that they're sort of dispersed. And that's why those have now become rugs. So, there's an irony in that, of course, which is that the linoleum off the floor has been patterned linoleum, has now been made into patterned linoleum, which is now on the wall, which has been photographed and printed and then sent to China and printed like those were printed, but with new technology, and now on the floor. And someone may well pick that and put that on the wall. That's just so. There's a sort of a circular thing going on here, which is kind of beautiful, I think. And also, there is still, currently, there's a real interest in the interface between what's fine art and what's craft. And of course, craft is always down at the bottom of the hierarchy. It's just craft. You know, this is real stuff. Well, of course, as an artist, all artists, good artists, are craftspeople. You know, there's craft in making work. You can't make good work without being a good craftsperson. So the interface between craft and fine arts I find really interesting. And I find carpets just as interesting as pictures on the wall, as I find bits of ceramic or many other things as interesting as I do fine artworks or whatever, you know? So I'm always interested in trying to sort of debate that for myself in terms of practice. So when I'm making these big works, well, those works there, that by the way is called, it's not of or an illustration of, but it's reminiscent. It comes from a journey that I took when I drove from Santa Fe to Taos about 5 years ago in New Mexico. And in Santa Fe, there's a folk art museum. It is an amazing museum. It's just folk art. Has anybody been to Santa Fe? You've been to the craft museum, go to the folk museum? It's absolutely amazing. And the colours in there and the shapes. And the drive to Taos, where you pass, crosses on the side of the road and reeds, and you get to a service station that had 30 old pull-out petrol tanks and cars lined up. It's just sort of weird. And so that's a part that's a journey, and it's 3 chapters. The first one is called Duck Hide, the middle one's called Seduction, and the third one's called The Body. And I kind of like the idea of being able to make a single work, but pull them apart as separate works, especially for sale, if you're in a gallery, right? It's easy to sell smaller works than bigger works. But I wanted to make this one work, which I did, and then it was pulled apart. So the duck hide on the left is, I should point it out to go it's called the duck. By the way, it's kind of like Tarantino. You know, like a Tarantino movie, you go the duck hide, 3 chapters within the film, or Wes Anderson, same sort of thing. So it's a narrative that starts and has a conclusion. I guess the body's the conclusion, but this is the duck, which is hiding. So that's a metal decoy that's in the garden. I collect duck decoys. So I picked it up, laid it on the line, and drew around it, cut the duck out, put it in there, but it's hiding. So it's duck out. So it's actually a leaf as well on this tree. The seduction. Very obvious, really. So this is a sort of central work in the middle. And then the body is kind of like spaghetti western. So I was kind of having fun as I was making this, and thinking about the landscape that I've been in, and which was like a spaghetti western anyway. So in these words, it's just to point out there's linoleum. Tiny bit of pretty old linoleum found in a cabinet in Ogden, an old French cabinet drawer. So I've got a tiny bit of that. This linoleum here, which I've got about 12 feet of, and it's so intense. I bought it actually off eBay. No, and what you do, I'm going to make a big work where this is the best, but it's like, so I bought that actually from a woman in the States. I bought that and this blue linoleum. I've got about 10 feet of that as well, so then we put this and this together. It'd be pretty psychedelic. And then this linoleum here, which is kind of quite bland. And I thought, oh, this is a bit bland. But the fantastic thing about this linoleum is that what holds this picture together is that grid that moves across with these little things. It's like through a fence. So, of course, the easiest way to make a picture work, like many abstract expressionists did, like Rauschenberg, and one thing or another, is to make a work where it's made up of rectangles. So it's a work that's a grid. And if you have a grid, it's almost impossible for a work not to work, really. But that's a very quiet grid. You don't read it as a grid. You don't really even see it unless I'm maybe pointing out, It's actually the same with Middlemarch. Middlemarch has a sort of it's a linoleum that has it's on a grid, but a patterned surface that holds the work together. That's an underlay. And then there's...
and which one did you make first, sorry?
You mean this or that just came after... Well, the same time really. Middlemarch had been on the go for quite a long time. And then I started this. Yeah. So they were stuck down around the same sort of time. And sticking a work down is quite difficult. If you've said 1,000 pieces and that around there, and they're quite large pieces of... so I used to, in the old days, when I first started, I'd roll up PDA here, I'd have the image there, and then I quickly take the base image with all these bits cut out, which is like a piece of lace, and put it on there, and then I'd have to try and shift it around, and then I'd have to quickly put all the bits in. And in summer it was beginning to dry, so I was kind of restricted to a certain size that I could work on. And also I'd work in winter, and cutting linoleum in winter is really tough going. It's very, very hard, cutting a circle, for instance, in cold linoleum. And so it was a slow process all around. I refined this process through just trial and error and necessity. So now I can, what's the obvious way to stick one of these down? You just cut it all out, inlay it. By the way, I'd be kill you if you told people how to do this. Then you put a piece of board on top, flip it, take that off, it's upside down, roll that up, stick it on top, turn it back, clean it, put newsprint down, bubble wrap, put a piece of ply on top and press it for 1.5 hours. It's like cooking. Take it off because all the PVA is leached out and you want to get rid of it before it dries. Clean it, then put it down and let it, deep press it and let it dry again all night so that it's in bow, you know? So that was a quick way. I had a hot plate built by the engineer at university. I said, hey Dave, can you build something that will warm my linoleum up? So that's built and that'll only go to 100 degrees. So it's hot. If you put your hand on it, it's hot, but you're not going to burn yourself. So I work on that. That warms the linoleum up. And then I was in an engineering shop and I thought, what is something that cuts holes out? And I've got this fantastic set of engineering tools, dies, which I can hammer different size circles. So I go boom, boom, boom. So now I can do really much more complicated things very quickly than I used to be able to do. In saying that, however, there's a danger in that because when I look back at the old work, it's kind of raunchier and rougher, and it has a sort of a different sensibility to it. And there's a danger with technology, because I've thought about laser cutting, I'm not going to do it, I don't think. The problem with technology is it can become, it can take over the way that you actually start to design things and make things. It becomes too slick. Sorry, it becomes too slick in a sense. So I want a combination of the two. Finally, why do I use gold leaf? Okay, so I love European modernism, Cubism, but I also love, I spent quite a bit of time in Italy over the last few years, and also in London in the basement of the National Gallery. You know this, Nigel, that sort of stuff. And down below, you'll find hidden away all those fabulous early Christian works, whatever you know, which sometimes they're almost nearly 100% gold leaf, and the gold is, you know, hammered and all sorts of stuff. And I found that really interesting, especially on small works. So I started using good gold leaf and silver leaf and copper leaf to patina to give to, as a way of not painting on the works, but adding another surface. And the thing about gold leaf and silver leaf, of course, is that it flattens the surface out. So that work on the back, which has quite a bit of gold leaf, that gold really, even though they're flat pictorial spaces anyway, really flattens that space out again. So it's quite a complicated thing to use because it's really easy to overdo it. And it's easy to underdo it, and usually it's easy not to do it at all because it's complicated, which is why I don't put it in Middlemarch at all. I didn't want any distractions going on. I use a lot of little gold leaf in small works in the hallway, and small works are continually going on while I'm making big works, because I had a show in Wellington quite a few years ago, and there were 85 small works in it, and the title of those works was, "If you don't eat your leftovers, you won't get any pudding." So what I was doing was trying to clean up the table with all the bits that I probably wouldn't say and use, and make small works. And of course, it's very quick making the small works, so it's just a way of keeping my eye in and getting away from the complications of having to deal with the bigger issues and the big works.
And those upright booths, it also isn't the hieroglyphics.
Yeah, and also that vertical thing that goes through a work. But of course, occasionally you get a couple that are down sleeping or up and singular, which are dead and rising. And one thing that's is a way also of giving a sense of that is the vertical side down. You know, it's hanging out from the top of the rope upside down, like a bat.
I didn't actually realise that running in orientation does.
So,
I didn't realise it was had a particular orientation there.
oh, right. Well, it does, but it works. I mean, it's a pattern. It can work in any sort of way. So the very first, my father had a book at home on Paul Clay, and I've got it now. And I can remember the first time I saw that Paul Clay work of birds hanging upside down and in cacti. I was about 11. And that just stayed with me. And I still go back and look at that in awe. You know, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. The thing is, how do you make a picture where a landscape of birds that are upside down and coming from the side of the picture, one thing or another, without it being silly, you know? But Paul Clay does it beautifully.
Well, I think if you're looking at a bird coming towards you, it's always upside down, isn't it?
That is actually, yeah. Unless you're standing on your
So
head.
you sort of get the feeling of flight.
Yeah.
Well, that's good, Simon.
That's right.
Very informative. And there's more down to do, isn't it?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Can I ask about?
Yeah.
I was curious about that kind of cracked lacquer effect on all of them, because you mentioned the lineups different ages.
Yeah.
So are some of those artificial and some natural, or is it just?
No, it's as it comes. I mean, I do, if I've got I've run out of space at home, so sometimes when I get lino, I'll put it outside and then forget about it, and then it'll rain, and then I can't take it because it's wet, and then it'll keep raining, and then I separate it out to dry it again. So I do kind of like the fact that I can weather some things. No, some linoleum is just, I feel like throwing, well, I don't feel like throwing away, I think I have to throw it away because I can't use it. So those two words up there, there's linoleum, especially that right hand one, there's linoleum that basically was falling apart, and it's actually very difficult to work with. So, no, they're all as I find them, with very little titillation. I clean them, and when I finish, I use Jif and a scrubber, and I really, really clean them. So linoleum is very tough, and then they're coated with a flat oil-based varnish, so there's no shine. It unifies the surface and also just makes the colour a little bit richer, you know. But that's it. And the oldest linoleum I've got, I think, well, it's not really linoleum actually, it's that hessian that used to hang on barn walls. And I found it in a little river, quite a lot of it, which I started cutting out all the peonies in it to put in works, until I suddenly thought, oh no, is this William Morris?
No.
I know, I thought. And I don't think it's William Morris, but I'm pretty damn certain it's Liberty.
Was it from that great big old barn sale we had a few months ago?
No, this is I've had this for years, and it was just in a broken down barn. And I thought, oh God, I've been cutting out peonies from this and putting it in work and selling the work far too cheap, because this is really rare. It should be in the Victorian Albert Museum. So I haven't used that material since. I've kind of archived it, and I've archived others. So some of the linoleums are pretty rare and fragile. So late 1800s, early 1900s, and then it goes through to about 1960.
So I thought you mentioned you wanted to train as a sculptor, and then you went and done training.
Yep.
Do you sort of regard this as almost like a two-dimensional sculpture?
I mean, I never became a painter, really. I became a picture maker. When people say, are you a painter? I say, I make pictures, usually, you know? I mean, I do paint, literally, sometimes, and I like it as well. But the people, my heroes, and I do have a few, people who affected the way that I look at the world, and one thing that a good few of them are famous sculptors. So people like Anthony Caro, David Smith, but to name two, there are more Alexander Colbert. I love the object quality. I love the way that they invent by use of material, but also the way, because they're welding, each of those are welding, the way that two forms can literally touch on a corner like this and hold themselves in space. So the one thing that I always do in all the works is, if things are going to be close to each other, how close are they going to be? Are they going to just touch and kiss, or are they going to be separate elements? So in here, this is a very sculptural thing for me. I mean, that breathing space there is absolutely crucial. The fact that that touches, literally just touches that, is absolutely crucial. This becomes one form, really, and this form counterbalances those two forms. This is a very sculptural form. I could easily make them as a freestanding work. Yeah, so I do think, in my head, I'm a picture-making sculptor.
Does anyone have any more questions? Now's the time.
That write-up that was here of your work.
Yes, Damien's right, yes.
I've heard a lot to Egyptology,
Yeah.
and the birds there do seem to be very Egyptian, ancient Egyptian, etc. Was that intentional or subconscious? Or
No, it wasn't intentional. I don't think of Egypt at all. So I've never been to Egypt, actually. So I've never really made works about that kind of hieroglyphic. Yeah, I've made works about Mexico. I've never been to Mexico, but I love the idea of Mexico. So, but generally the works that I make are memories from places that I've been. I've been to quite a few places, you know. But Egypt isn't one of them. So it's interesting. I mean, I do think about it from time to time, because I made a large series of plaster relief works, which everybody said looked like cartouche, and they were Egyptian, and which is interesting. And Damien, when Damien has written about the work, he's given his take on it, not as an art historian, but as a creative writer. I mean, he's a fantastic writer. In fact, this piece that he wrote for Middlemarch, I asked him if he'd do that. I said, can we do a trade? I give you work and you write about the work. And he said, yep, absolutely. So that was a really lovely kind of collaboration. And I said, write what you want. Don't ask me questions. I don't want to answer anything. Just write what you think about it is you're looking at. And that's what he got out of it. So. And given its context, it's quite beautiful. And I think he's written a really, really, really lovely piece. It's exactly what I wanted, but without asking, without giving any directions at all.
yes, I found it very useful to just decipher your.
But you know, Roger Hilton, just before I say your name, which one you don't know, Roger Hilton, who's a very good English painter from the St. Ives group, who wrote about, and he was a rebel, Roger Hilton. He was a chain-smoking, alcoholic, abusive thing. He made beautiful works, he made really interesting works, you know? And he said, he was asked a question, and he said, he talked very succinctly, and I don't have writing here, which I did, but he talks about how useless writing is as a way of understanding a work. In fact, it's not just useless, it's an impediment to finding work. He says that when you read about an artist's work and about the artist, people believe they can understand the work better and they know the artist better. In fact, they're not looking, the only way of understanding the work is to look at the work, and in reading about the artist, they understand the artist less. And, it's an interesting piece of writing. And the only way to understand work is just to look at work. And words make no difference, except with Damien, for me, he's a creative writer. He's not an art historian or a curator trying to give a work importance. He's creatively writing about, something that he's seen, and that kind of writing, I think, is a lovely counterbalance or companion to the work, really. It's got nothing to do with me, it's not mine, it's his, but I'm happy for it to be there.
Well, also I always said, the only people who can write about art are poets.
Yeah, precisely. And I agree.
And it was kind of like a door into looking at yourself. And if you don't look at it, if you get anything, it's just like putting fog in front of what you see.
Yeah.
Now I think we've just gone 1 minute past 1.
Oh, there we go.
So let's make freedom. Yeah, and so have a